10. Queen of hating her daughter. Starting off this list with a bang would have to be the utterly despicable Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg, the Queen of Sweden. Queen Maria here seems to be guilty of the crime of attempted delifing. That's a pretty crazy thing for a queen, but it gets even crazier when you find out it was her own daughter who she tried to do this to. For some reason, when the queen gave birth to her daughter, who she wanted to be a son, she instantly thought of her sweet, innocent little daughter as a dark and ugly monster with black eyes. Gotta love coming into this world and being hated purely for existing. As she saw her as a monster, Maria tried to have her daughter dispatched multiple times, and I don't know what this crime would be called, but she even forced her daughter to sleep next to the rotting corpse of her own father. Maybe that's the true crime here, because this is messed up. Number 9. Don't mess with the Empress. The only powerful female emperor in the history of China has got to make you extremely ruthless, simply because you are a target and you would have needed to work to get to where you are. And you know what? Wu Zetian, who ruled during China's Tang Dynasty, was quite ruthless. She took her position of power by force, and she slayed many people in order to do so. But she didn't stop there. She committed more acts of slaying throughout her rule as well. And I don't mean like slay queen, although that does really work for this list, but no, she slayed people. And we don't support that kind of criminal behavior, even if you are above the law. To make matters worse though, it is reported that even her mother and grandchildren fell onto that list of victims, all because they were against her. Truly a ruthless queen. Number 8. Mommy issues. Empress Irene of Athens ruled between 797 to 802, and she co-ruled with her son for 2 decades before leaving it all by herself. That's not a crime, but how she did so was a bit more, I don't know, just a little outside the realm of legality by today's standards. Her son, Emperor Constantine VI, was not a popular emperor, and the empress was quite an ambitious and greedy woman. She wanted full control of the Byzantine Empire, and to do that, with the help of some political allies, Irene led a conspiracy against her own son. Poor parenting skills if you ask me, but hey, the two actually made up and were at least somewhat civil. That is until Constantine divorced his wife and married his mistress, turning the people against him and giving Irene the opportunity to lead another conspiracy and then have her son's eyes gouged out. Yay! Number 7. Ranavalona. I honestly didn't know Madagascar had queens or kings. That's not because it doesn't make sense, I'm just dumb. Thanks to me being a young child, I thought the only royalty Madagascar had was King Julian, you know, like the lemur. King Julian! Like that King Julian. But they did have kings and queens, and one of these queens was pretty damn brutal. Queen Ranavalona I ruled Madagascar between 1828 and 1861, and there is absolutely no doubt that she would do anything for her kingdom. After King Radama I, her husband, passed away, she took over the crown, and during her reign, she put a lot of people to the axe, or whatever way they executed people in Madagascar. Her uncle was one who met the sticky end to protect her power. But some records state that Ranavalona ended her own mother's life by subjecting her to starvation. Ranavalona sent her mom to her room and didn't let her have dinner. Or any meals, really. That's never okay, and would get someone like us charged under the law with something. I don't know what exactly it would be, but it'd be something. Number 6. Pretty firmly against cheating. Not to be weird, but I can kind of see where this queen is coming from. At first I sorta get it, but not later on, just at first. Henry II of France had a lifelong affair with his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, and even while on his deathbed, he begged his own wife, Queen Catherine de Medici, to allow him to see her. Kind of really disrespectful to your wife, but I guess he loved his mistress too. I'm kind of confused on the morals of this. However, the queen was not confused on the morals and didn't give in to his plea. In fact, she even denied Diane entry into the room, letting the king pass away without having his dying wish granted. Damn. That ain't a crime. This queen had a daughter who took after her dear old dad when it came to the whole monogamous relationships, meaning she didn't really have them. When the queen mother found out about her married daughter's new romantic interest, she locked her daughter up in a castle and never saw her again. But she became even worse when she ordered her daughter's romantic interest to be executed in front of her. Now that is rough. And while she didn't do the deed herself, giving the order is kinda bad enough. It gets worse. Her son, King Henry, didn't like that she cruelly did this to her own daughter, so she had him dispatched as well. My goodness.
Number 5. Rebel Princess. Princess Leia wasn't the only rebel, okay? Princess Margaret partied with rock stars during the 60s. The Queen's younger sister was known as the Rebel Princess. She was seen for years and years as this, well, bad. She passed away in 2002, but even to this day we're trying to piece together her love life. Pablo Picasso actually wanted to marry her at one point. How fun is that? Also, side note, I didn't realize how recent Pablo Picasso died. That was alarming to find out. Guess my whole life's a lie. Her wedding was the first to be aired on TV. That's quite a big deal. The first televised royal wedding took place on May 6, 1960. In 1968, just 8 years after, word had spread that the princess had an affair at a nightclub with pianist Robin Douglas Home, who only a year and a half later took his own life. Adds a lot of mystery there. Then come 1973, the paparazzi got photos of her with a landscape gardener on her private island. One of the more unusual facts surrounding Princess Margaret was that she was cremated, believe it or not. She had chosen to break tradition so that her ashes could be shared in the same tomb as her father. How sweet is that? These acts are unusual when it comes to royalty, but Margaret also supported more than 80 charity organizations. But even then, media still focused on her love life. Classic. Keep it up.
At number 4, Warrior Queen. Let's talk about Queen Rani Lakshmi Bai and how she became known as India's Joan of Arc. Rani was a fighter her whole life. She was raised to be a warrior and was taught how to fight. She even shared her skills with other women, teaching them the same fighting skills at a young age. She was married off to a much older man and she had a child, but she lost them both pretty early on. In need of an heir, she adopted a son and served as Queen Regent, but soon a growing conflict started, causing a lot of tension between the British East Indian Company and her people. The young queen, at just 22 years old, wanted to drive British forces out of her land, and so she organized a revolt that turned bloody very quickly. She ordered the execution of literally every British person in the region. So Bobby from down the street, dead. Mary from around the block, goner. Freddie and Harriet, the kids of that guy that you know who bought shoes off your brother, bye bye. Gone. Rani killed every man, woman, and child in the area, but it still wasn't enough to win against the British. The queen died on the battlefield and the British ended up winning the battle and the kingdom fell to the enemy forces. This queen was one of the bravest and most determined women in history, and she's still remembered as a hero.
Number 3. Chilonis. The reason we look at princesses like Margaret and say she was a rebel is because most of the time these marriages are chosen. Well, rather, women are forced to marry some gross fat dudes. And while he's cheating and eating lobster, the wife has to have his kids and be dutiful. So for the Spartan princess from the 3rd century, she too was forced to marry Cleonymus, this older, horrible man. He was so horrible that he wasn't even allowed to have his father's throne. That's how bad he was. He was in the family and still they're like, no. So Chilonis thought, this guy sucks, the system sucks, I'm gonna go talk to the much more pleasant Architatus, son of King Ares I. Around 272 BC, both these guys, both her lovers, went to war with each other. Drama. How about the tea on that? Chilonis was preparing to hang herself in case her husband won. That's horrible. Now luckily he lost, therefore the princess this time around did really live happily ever after with her other man. That's like an R-rated version of Shrek 2, what I just said. I can't believe people had to go through this in real life. That's horrible.
At number 2, toxic cosmetics. The price of beauty is pretty steep. These days people spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on makeup to make themselves feel beautiful, but back in the day makeup not only cost a pretty penny, but it also cost some serious health concerns. Cosmetics were made of a lot of questionable ingredients that you probably wouldn't find in today's products, but for people like Queen Elizabeth I, she didn't care what she was putting on her skin, so long as she not only looked like a snack, but the whole damn meal. Yeah. Elizabeth had pitting in her skin from when she contracted smallpox at the age of 29, and back then, having blemished skin was a sign that God was a little cheesed with you, or that you were having some wild thoughts like thinking about the sexy time ooh. It was thought that these thoughts bubbled up from your no-no square up to your face and showed everyone that you were sinning. Anyways, to cover up the blemishes, Elizabeth wore a lot of makeup, like her version of foundation, but the ingredients were really just making things worse and not better. The foundation was made with a tincture of white lead ore, vinegar, and sometimes arsenic, hydroxide, and carbonate. To add some color back to her face after applying this pasty white mask, she powdered cinnabar to her lips and cheeks, but this was pretty dangerous because it contained mercury. She did this every day, and as you can imagine, it wasn't good for her health at all. Imagine absorbing all of those chemicals through your face on a daily basis. Not cute.
And finally, number 1. Are you not entertained? Back in the late 1800s, the name Clara Ward would stir up a conversation. She was famous, really famous, for all the wrong reasons, of course. All it took was her bumping into a European royal and Bob's your uncle. Since birth, Clara was born into money. She didn't even need a royal husband. She was born into a wealthy industrialist family. She would sometimes visit the family mills, you know, to make it look good and kind of be like, hey, how's everyone doing? Whatever, just casual visit. But on this one casual visit, she crossed paths with the Prince of Caraman-Chimay. He was there for trade, but when he left, he brought back a wife. Carry on. Also, meet my wife. Here she is. People were freaking out, obviously. A royal marrying a common American girl. Wow, how could you? She was the talk of the town. Unlike Meghan Markle, Clara loved to show off with her newfound wealth. Some loved her and her image, but others not so much. The marriage only lasted 6 years. Clara eloped with a Hungarian musician. Then after her divorce, she had to model to make a living rather than showing off for clout.
Number 1 is context on the missing queens. Lexi de los Santos, a Nat Geographic promoter, perfectly describes the treatment of Egyptian queens. Out of all the ancient civilizations, Egypt was the only one that really valued women, but after their rule, male leaders just erased all memory of these women because they didn't want them to have all that success. But why would ancient men, in a culture that respected and revered women, still strike them off the record in a fit of primal jealousy when they've been regal? It was best explained in the recent Bumblebee video, Top 10 Messed Up Things That Happened to Women in Ancient Egypt. It's the blame game. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were supposed to be the human incarnate of the gods, but one thing that the male gods, female gods, and human females all had in common was the truest power, the womb. The ability to create and birth life, Ra's greatest creation. All of mankind came from Ra, the king god, yet any man who sat on the throne as pharaoh, meant to be the incarnate of Ra, was missing that one true power. So what that meant is anytime a female pharaoh took the throne, she was more akin to the king god by the Egyptians' own definition than the male pharaoh ever could be. Call that a mic drop. Consequently, if the womb wielders had a built-in facet of power that you can't regulate, recreate, nor have for yourself, chances are you're gonna be pretty snubbed. So if she's also a better ruler than her male counterparts, you're going to be resentful. Unfortunately, this means the documentation of many queens is lost to time. Their stories coming to us in broken pieces of pottery and papyrus, on ancient word of mouth from Greek and Rome, or from unidentified mummies that come and go as the sands blow thanks to the jealousy of mankind. Leader number 9 will be Khentihase the First. So, who was the first woman to rule Egypt? This will be the biggest debate of the video, as there are technically 3 qualifiers. First candidate is Khentihase the First. She was born circa 2550-2520 BC and died sometime between 2510 and 2490 BC. The remains of this female leader were undisturbed for 2 millennia within her necropolis until its excavation in the 1930s. And since its discovery at Giza, her tomb has intrigued historians and archaeologists alike. The mausoleum is as grand as other pyramids of her predecessors and includes a solar boat, a chapel, granaries, and a water tank. A small structure known as the washing tent of the female king had been built in front of her temple, and here the body was washed and ritually purified prior to being embalmed. Her mastaba is believed to have been the final royal tomb that was constructed at that necropolis, and many scholars believe that it was strongly connected to the pharaohs of the 4th and 5th dynasties. On its granite doorway, her formal title is construed to be the mother of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, holding office as King of Upper and Lower Egypt. In support of the latter title is her image, which is altered to show her in a kingly pose, including the false beard, the royal uraeus cobra crown, and holding a scepter, one of the many adjustments and additions made up until the 6th century, implying that this pharaoh possibly had continued a role in religion and worship after her death. Khenti may have ruled as a regent for her presumed son, Sahur, possibly in conjunction with Ustarkaf, the founder of the 5th dynasty. However, despite the fact that she was apparently considered an ancestress of the 5th dynasty and was commemorated in the mortuary temple of Apsur at Kenikartes II, her name has never been found in a royal cartouche. Leader number 8 is Mernis. Among ancient Egypt's greatest female leaders was Queen Mernis, who had the overwhelming ambition to rule a country, and stopped whoever shared that sentiment. Her name means the beloved Neith, the daughter of King Diar, and beloved she seemed to be, until after she died, and then the men didn't have to respect her anymore, that is. Even if she wasn't the first woman to rule Egypt, she definitely seemed to be. But if historians want to debate endlessly, who am I to stop their fun? She definitely was the first woman to rule anything in known human history, because she was born about 3,000 years ago. Merneith stepped in as regent after her husband's death, as their son Den was too young to rule at the time. Karakuni, an Egyptologist, said that these women were often used as protectors. Men would put women in high positions to keep young male leaders safe and give them time to mature. When a man was ready to take over as pharaoh, the woman in charge would step down. But Merneith was Old Kingdom Egypt, and when she assumed this tutelage, it was in despite of what religious traditions of the first dynasty decreed, that only men were to rule. Despite that, Merneith stood rigidly by her son for a full decade, from 2939 to 2929 BC, until he became one of the most prominent kings of Old Kingdom Egypt. Despite the fact that there are few records of her name in any tombs, her accomplishments and life, she's still believed to have been a figure of great power and simultaneously respected and despised. Either way, she's one of those pharaohs that was buried alongside 50 live servants. Leader number 7 is Nikokris. The third and most mysterious candidate for the first female king of Egypt is recorded many centuries later in the work of the Egyptian historian Manetho. Her name is Nikokris, and she was believed to have lived around the 22nd century BC, which was towards the end of the 6th dynasty. Some have suggested that Nikokris was the last pharaoh of this dynasty. As Manetho tells us, she built the third pyramid and reigned for 12 years, but the whole third pyramid thing is an absolute disaster. If you know anything about ancient Egypt, there's just so much BS around the kings list and the dynasties. We don't know who made it, and every time we think we do, someone else shows up in history and has it attributed to them. So it's up in the air. Herodotus also mentions Nikokris, but in the colorful context that she had killed hundreds to avenge the Egyptian king who had been slain by the people in a coup, and who happened to be her brother. The people had given the kingdom to Nikokris to rule after doing so. The story is that she had constructed an elaborate underground dining chamber under the guise of it being for her coronation, inviting all those she knew to be responsible for her brother's death, as well as anyone who knew of the coup plan but did nothing of it. This includes servants, concubines, officials, priests, the whole shebang. As the banquet progressed, Nikokris, surveying safely from a platform, had her servants open the floodgates and let the flow of the Nile River into the chamber through a concealed pipe, drowning all in attendance. To quote Herodotus, that is all the information I was given about Nikokris, except that afterwards she threw herself in a chamber full of ashes to avoid retribution. Leader number 6 is Sobenekfru. It's not until the end of the Middle Kingdom that we find for the first time 100% pure clear evidence of a female king. So, her name was Sobenekfru, and there are about 5 variations of her name, all harder to say than the last. However, the name Sobenekfru means the beauties of Sobek, in reference to the crocodile god, one that the rulers of the 12th dynasty established a religious and economic center in Fayum IV, where crocodiles were nurtured and worshipped. Queen Sobenekfru rose to power after the death of her brother/husband Amenemhat IV, which made her the 8th ruler of Egypt's 12th dynasty, and she went on to rule for nearly 4 years. That was a lot of numbers in one sentence, so I hope you're keeping up. Though missing her head in many, the queen statues found in Fayum show that she appeared to combine masculine and feminine aspects of regal dress, similar to many other female rulers of Egypt. She is the last ruler prior to the New Kingdom to appear in the offering list found at Abydos and Saqqara, which does suggest some kind of posthumous verdict that separates her from the kings who followed her with equally short reigns. How Sobenekfru died or where she was buried remains a mystery. Some have suggested that her burial might be in one of the pyramids at Masgana, but this is very unlikely, as is Amenemhat's labyrinth or Herculapolis, both of which she contributed to. Thus, one of the most powerful women of the early world history remains a mystery.
Number 5, the Terror of London. If you're into serial killers and just a little goth or emo, I mean who isn't, then you know who Jack the Ripper is. If you don't, he was a serial killer who roamed the streets of Victorian England and killed multiple women of the evening, in what can be called the first, or one of the first, modern serial killers. Jack the Ripper, however, is one of the psychos who got away. No one is 100% sure on who the Terror of London was. However, that hasn't stopped people from theorizing on his or her true identity. No, not Queen Victoria herself, although there are some who believe he was a woman, which would explain how he got away so easily. However, another popular theory is that it was the Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor. While there isn't much evidence to support this claim, or any of the claims really, it is interesting and makes me wonder, maybe the royal was a killer. We'll never know. Number 4. Short Kings Unite! Even though I'm a semi-charming and moderately handsome internet host, I suffer from an illness a lot of men do. I suffer from shortness. When the Lord was making me, he just put a few extra drops of cute in the mix. And then there was no more room for my legs to grow. I just see life from a little bit down below. Although, I own it, and thank God I don't have little man syndrome. All toxic jokes aside, Queen Victoria may have been a good fit for us short kings, as she was barely 5 feet tall. She's known for being a formidable queen, but when you're that short, it can sometimes be difficult to keep your stature. Somebody take me seriously! Number 3. Dollies. Okay, so maybe my Sailor Moon merch collection is weird. Maybe I just want to be a cute blonde Japanese girl with a short skirt fighting evil. Can you blame me? However, something I always find strange, no matter who it is and who owns it, is a doll collection. Why? Just why? And it's never a couple, it's always a large collection. And tell me why anytime you go to visit someone and stay overnight, they always put you in a guest room where the majority of the dolls reside. There's nothing like 100 pair of creepy plastic eyes staring you down while you're trying to sleep in a bed that isn't yours. Well, Her Royal Majesty had her own collection of dolls. Yeah, that's right. You can just imagine the kind of treatment these dolls received. It said she had hundreds of them, and most likely wore higher quality clothes than most common folk at the time. Great, now my worst nightmares outnumber me, and they're dressed to the nines. Whew, dolls are just creepy. Number 2. Here Comes the Bride. Imagine being so powerful, so mighty, and influential that you'll create 2 Western traditions. Sure, the Christmas tree is great, but I'd argue the white wedding dress is more. She wasn't the first to wear a white wedding dress, but she was the one that made it happen. There's a few reasons why, and the obvious one is flexing that royal coin, but imagine trying to keep pure white clothes clean in the past. My mom makes a mean spaghetti and meatballs, and I have a difficult time keeping those stains off my white t-shirts, which, if you also ask my mom, is a bad color for me. I was a messy kid. That's why other colors at the time made sense. After all, there's no dry cleaning in the 1800s. At least not with modern machines and stain remover. Hey Alexa, can you add stain remover to my list? Number 1. Send lewds. Despite being known as a somewhat prudent queen, apparently the queen had an eye for the art that was lewd. In one case, the royal husband and wife gave each other art. She got some nice work, and he got some nice works, if you catch my drift. We all know how nudity and lewd imagery can be treated by those who wish to censor it. Queen Victoria felt the opposite and had somewhat of an appreciation for the human form, even commissioning a lewd painting of herself. At least lewd for the time, it was more like a wrist and ankles kind of thing, but you know.
While sweet and demure Queen Jane is remembered as the one woman Henry VIII truly loved, she's the only one not divorced or beheaded or widowed, yet her family name is painted red by the morons she shared blood with. Jane's parents were Sir John Seymour and Lady Marjorie Wentworth. He was a soldier and courtier serving both Henry VII and VIII. However, one issue is not always mentioned in his biographies is the alleged affair he had with his daughter-in-law, Catherine Filiot, the wife of his eldest son Edward. Edward and Catherine were politically and financially a good match during their marriage in 1519, but they hated each other. They could not stand each other at all. So in the 1520s, while Edward is out playing toy soldier and banging working girls, Catherine gets in touch with her father-in-law. A little too much. By the time Catherine birthed a son, the less than subtle affair was so widely known that her father John changed the line of heirs away from her. Not to mention the child's paternity was so in doubt her husband Edward refused to acknowledge his son John as his own. Catherine was exiled to a convent where she remained until her death. Then there's Jane Seymour's dashing younger brother Sir Thomas Seymour, who's best known for marrying Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's widow. While Catherine Parr was pregnant, however, Thomas Seymour started hitting on the uncomfortably young future Elizabeth I. Then Thomas began visiting the young king, giving him candy in return for trying to schmooze power from him. What Thomas intended on the night he was discovered trying to break into the king's apartments at Hampton Court Palace was never really established, hurt, harm, or otherwise. Scholars have suggested it was an attempted person theft, or it might have been another attempt to weirdly try and win the young king over onto his side. Either way, he was caught at the king's apartment at night trying to break in with a hand arm which he had already used to pop one of Edward's, the beloved pet spaniels, when it barked at this unexpected intruder. He was sentenced to death the next day. Queen number 9 is the Heartless Hag, aka Catherine de Medici. Maybe calling her a hag is harsh, but heartless is a title she earned. Listen girl, while it's no news to the world that Henry II of France had a lifelong affair with his mistress Diane de Poitiers, as he loved her more than he could ever love Catherine, we got sympathy for the woman. She's put in an arranged marriage, she actually loves him, but he never loves her and always makes her secondary to the woman he does love, despite her not having enough authority, but she kinda does, but she definitely doesn't. It's a messy situation that make any slighted woman into an emotionally numb and void machine. Now, does that excuse Henry being on his deathbed, begging and begging Catherine to just open the bedroom door and let his mistress Diane in so he can see her one last time before he dies? I don't know. Kinda. Maybe. Maybe I'm vindictive. I don't know. Catherine really did do that, by the way. She barricaded herself into Henry's room while he died, while Diane tried over and over to get in to see Henry as he, bedlocked and slowly suffering, pleaded to see her in return. But Catherine never folded. However, that wasn't what made her a terrible queen. She proved herself as one of the worst queens in history when she ordered her daughter's romantic interest to be killed in front of her. Catherine took out her own suffering and pushed it onto her daughter, the way many mothers of the world, both past and present, abscond their suffering onto their daughters. She could have broken the cycle, but instead she wanted her daughter to feel the pain and lovelessness that she had. Catherine would fight over her married daughter's adulteries and affairs, as she too had been forced into an unhappy arranged marriage. It said that Catherine's screams could be heard echoing throughout the palace. During one instance, when the Queen Mother found out about her daughter's new romantic interest, she locked her up in the castle and nobody saw her again. Queen number 8 is the Pain of Spain. No one expected the Spanish Inquisition. Well, except for Queen Isabel I of Castile, the evil Queen of Spain, who began the campaign to purify her country and aided in financing Christopher Columbus's famous voyage in 1492 that would end the lives of 250 million indigenous people in the New World, and subsequently launched the stealing of people from Africa for forced labor. Wildly, she's still best known for her formidable streak during the 4-year war for the succession of Castile against her niece Joanna. And yes, it's the crazy Joanna. Queen Isabel and her husband Ferdinand expanded the power of the monarchy, purging the influence of the nobles and reinstating Catholicism as the supreme religion of Spain. This is something they did so well that Pope Alexander declared them Catholic monarchs for the work of their oh so amazing Spanish Inquisition that also oppressed Jewish and Muslim minorities. When she chose to purify her country, it meant she ordered that either all the Jews and Muslims convert to Catholicism or get thrown out, having them rounded up and brought to the Spanish court to either pledge their faith to Catholicism in front of her and Ferdinand or get the boot. And it's how most who refused to renounce their faith ended up, instead of adrift on a boat somewhere. Queen number 7 is Angry Irene, the first and only of Byzantine empresses. Irene of Athens ruled between 797 to 802 CE, and she went from empress consort to empress regent to finally being the sole empress before being deposed after a reign of just 5 years, only for her son Emperor Constantine to be an unpopular and crappy emperor following her. The mother-son duo was indeed a Greek tragedy. Irene and her son had signed a document decreeing that icon veneration was not the same as worship and thus restored it to their empire, and the relations between the Church of Constantinople and the Church of Rome. The empress was an ambitious woman and wanted full control of the Byzantine Empire. This then led to the late Leo IV's half-brothers staging another coup to overthrow Irene. When their plots discovered, they're forced to be ordained as priests by Irene for punishment. You can tell she had a sense of humor. With the help of some political allies, Irene led a conspiracy against her own son after their relationship went to crap thanks to her forcing him to marry a woman he hated, and her refusing to stop co-ruling once he was old enough to rule alone. The conflict between Constantine and his mother culminated in 797, wherein Irene hatched a conspiracy to take the throne for herself. In 786, the public had turned against Constantine after he decided to divorce said wife and marry the mistress, so Irene successfully arrested her son and brought him to the imperial palace, where she stood over him as he was restrained and his eyes were gouged out. And then Constantine was never heard from again. Queen number 6 is the Spurned Mother. During the 6th century, Cyrus the Great ruled the Achaemenid Empire with an iron fist, one of the most powerful Persian rulers who ever lived. He won battle after battle during his long and violent reign. Stories of his brutality and military cunning struck fear into the hearts of other people for thousands of miles. However, he was felled by one very, very powerful woman named Tomidis, Queen of the Massatae, a group of Scythian people who lived in Central Asia at the times of Cyrus's rule. By the Middle Ages, those Massatae people became a group that's still well known today, the Huns. Now, at first, good old Cyrus didn't view the Huns as a threat. In fact, he deemed them so worthy of the brush off that for fun one night he tripped a a group of them into getting drunk when they'd never had liquor before. While they were inebriated, Cyrus's men imprisoned them. Waking up still drunk and imprisoned and having never experienced the feeling before, the men were terrified and they didn't know what kind of spell or poison they'd been given. In fact, one man gets so scared of the poison that he takes his own life lest it end it painfully. Again, Cyrus didn't think much of that crap, as he considered the man to just be another nomad. But he was far from. He was Tomiris's beloved son, and she was their queen. Enraged at her son's death, Tomiris sent messengers to Cyrus demanding answers and compensation. When Cyrus ignored all those requests, the grieving mother wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and decided it was time to rain literal hell on the man. Tomiris challenged the Persians to a battle, and Cyrus accepted. The Massite had more soldiers who were more well trained than they'd ever let on, and they were mounted on some of the largest steeds the Persians had ever seen. Cyrus was in trouble as Tomiris's men surrounded the Persians on all sides and started killing thousands. As for Cyrus himself, Tomiris personally saw to it that he was cut down by her own sword. Then she placed his severed head in a bag of blood and rode home to celebrate the victory in honor of her fallen son.
Number 5. Charlotte Augusta. Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales lost her life in 1817, and when I say ancient, this is probably the most recent that I'll go, because I know ancient means way back. I gotcha. But I have to include this one because as far as royals go, she was loved at this time. She ended up falling in love with Britain's Prince Leopold, but a year and a half later, she died giving birth. She was healthy at the time. She was only 21 years old when this happened. Charlotte was lined up to be the queen one day, and historical accounts say that the doctors here were at fault. Charlotte's tragic passing had vendors running out of black fabric. That's how rocked the public was right after this. Just massive displays of grief. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Was this a doctor conspiracy or just classic medieval times? It's the olden days. We can't really do as much. Let us know. Number 4. Catherine Howard. Queen of England from 1540 to 1541. Such a short amount of time, but why? Being the 5th wife of King Henry VIII, cousin to Anne Boleyn, referred to by King Henry as his rose without a thorn, he just gave her all the gifts and she was just 19 years old. Sounds great so far, but you know, because of his list, things won't end up well. Their marriage didn't even last a year until rumors, not letters or eyewitnesses, rumors started spreading about infidelity. There was a small amount of evidence that suggested that she had been romantically involved with somebody beforehand, so a jealous mad king got jealous and mad again. Shocker. You had me at 5th wife, I don't know. She was executed for adultery and treason at the Tower Green on February 13th, 1542. Number 3. Catherine Parr. When Catherine Parr got a position in Princess Mary's house in 1542, she met King Henry VIII. She was smart, she was 30 years old, so it was a step in the right direction age-wise when it comes to these queens and King Henry. Not that there's anything wrong with marrying somebody younger, that's not what I'm saying, but it's just, well, look at this list. All of these people died, spoiler alert, so the older the better at least. I don't know. She was seen as somebody who could nurse the king in his dying age, so the public liked her. She was the first English queen also to write and publish her own books. Now, come 1543, Catherine gave up her man, Thomas Seymour, to marry the king. The two got married that July at Hampton Court Palace, and from that point on, her beliefs were deemed dangerous. Queen Catherine was a supporter of the English Reformation, and Catherine's religious opponents were plotting against her, and they tried to convince the king that she was dangerous. Her arrest was even planned, everything was kind of going in a bad direction. And then Catherine went to King Henry right away and then asked for forgiveness herself. You know, for pushing her views too far many times before, and he forgave her. Meanwhile, others are losing heads for having relationships. Okay? Her and Henry were married for 5 years, and then after his death, she married Thomas Seymour just a few months later. And then come September 1548, she died after giving birth to her daughter. The account of her death comes from a lady-in-waiting and friend of Catherine Parr, comes from Elizabeth Tyrrett, only her account is fishy because she never liked Thomas Seymour to begin with. She made it seem like Catherine was speaking about her husband in a negative manner when she was dying, and this is the only time in history where that's ever been an idea. So what do you think? It's like broken telephone, but hundreds of years ago. I'm like, maybe she was friends? I don't know. Sounds like a conspiracy. Number 2, Anne of Cleves. Where to even begin here? Okay, this one is sad, man. Anne was right in the middle of Henry's wives. She was married to King Henry for 6 months, and it was seen as quite strategic in a way. Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, Henry requested that Hans Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister. This is like the birth of Tinder right now. I'm not joking, this actually happened. This man compared portraits and then chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. She was compared to the silver moon. Yeah, try that on a dating site. I praiseth thou beauty, madam. Super swipe. A treaty was signed, and a few weeks later Anne arrived to England. Henry was beyond upset because she looked nothing like she did in her portrait. Yep, real life, this is what really happened. He tried to stop the wedding because of this, but it was too late. They had to follow through, and they got married on January 6, 1540. Anne later accepted the divorce because obviously a divorce was in play after what you just heard, and then she lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Of all the ways to be remembered in history, King Henry made this horrible for Anne. And finally, number 1, Cleopatra. Last of the Egyptian pharaohs and last on our list. One of the biggest questions to this day is just how Cleopatra died. What happened? It's been rumored for a while that a snake bite was the culprit, but many believe that Cleopatra also allowed a poisonous snake to end her life. They think it was a bite from an asp. But there's also a large amount of historians that also believe that she poisoned herself using a hairpin. Her lover Antony fell on his own sword, but Cleopatra, she just poked herself. She barely lost blood. Now, as a youngin', we have to note that Cleopatra was brilliant. She was also interested in learning specifically about chemistry, so this theory about her poisoning herself doesn't sound very far-fetched. Until we find her body, we'll really never know. Kicking off the list at number 10, 18 years old. Queen Victoria's reign began back in 1837 and lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. At just age 18, Alexandria Victoria had to rise up to the throne. She was born on May 24th, 1819. Queen Victoria was the 5th in line when she was born, so right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely she would ever get the crown to begin with. And then one by one, all of her family members began passing away. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed, and then her father and her grandfather both died a week apart from each other. So by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next in line for the throne. Number 9, the Kensington system. So as if that wasn't already stressful enough being at that age and already seeing what's happened, Victoria was brought up under the Kensington system, which if you haven't heard of before is pretty awful. Victoria's mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this Kensington system to control her daughter, ideally. She literally isolated the child from playmates or even family members. Her mother did this to keep her pure. Yeah, the system sounds awful. Her mother would monitor her every single action, including who she can see or speak to. Victoria only had 2 playmates growing up entirely. She had her half-sister, Princess Fedora of Lennigan, and the Duchess's attendant, Sir John Conroy, his daughter, Victoria. I mean, I only had 3 friends growing up, but this is just cruel. This is a whole new level. She shared a room with her mother until she was the queen. She literally couldn't walk down the hallway alone without her mother being right there by her side. Victoria has reflected on her childhood, and obviously she hates John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She refers to him as demon incarnate. Number 8, publicity. The Duchess was pretty cruel to Victoria. Just because you're next in line doesn't mean it's going to be glamorous speed dating and no one's doing a musical number while you meet your handsome Prince Charming. It's nothing like that at all. Victoria was forced to go on these long, excruciating, boring tours around England in hopes for the Duchess to sell her daughter to the public eye. So these crowds would start to gather at all these appearances. They loved the young Victoria. Thing is, during one of these tours, October 1835, Victoria got really sick. She had a bad fever, and the Duchess was using the weak Victoria. She was taking advantage of her. But luckily she got better, and obviously her mother couldn't do anything crazy, but she had her sights set on her while she was sick. That's pretty cruel. That's disgusting. Number 7, name change. Every year on May 24, we set off fireworks and we have way too many hot dogs. It's the best, right? It's called Victoria Day. It's for sure called Victoria Day, right? There's no question about that. Victoria Day, her day. Well, back in 1819, Victoria was christened in an almost private ceremony. It was small, and Victoria's uncle, Prince Regent, only let a few people come. Her name, as I mentioned earlier, was originally Alexandrian Victoria, and at that time, the name Victoria wasn't regal. It was of French origin, almost an odd name to have at the time, really. So when this throne snuck up to her, she was advised to change her name to something more traditional, but as our calendars tell us, she said, nah, I'm good, I'll keep it. Number 6, moving out. Queen Victoria had turned 18 right before she was handed the crown. The timing here was key because now this meant Victoria could leave and just do things. Yeah, for once in her damn life, she could leave her mother and John. She moved from Kensington to Buckingham Palace, and after that point, Victoria, of course, didn't speak with John or her mother really ever again. It was just a couple years into Victoria's reign where John's influence started to get limited. He ended up resigning, and then he moved to Italy, and then when she was crowned a year later at Westminster Abbey, Queen Victoria wrote in her diary, "I shall remember this day as the proudest of my life." Queen Victoria was the first royal family member to live at Buckingham Palace. She moved. She was like, I'm gonna go live over there and be the first. I'm gonna start my new thing. I'm never gonna live in a palace. I'm like, that's a good castle, I like it. Driveway's a little long for me. Shoveling would hurt my Canadian back, but otherwise, I like the bricks.
Number 5, Marie Antoinette. So France's queen between 1774 and 1792 was Marie Antoinette, who was, the last queen before the French Revolution. She had quite the reputation for splurging on expensive things and found herself in quite a few scandals. One in particular was the affair of the diamond necklace. So Countess de la Motte, a young lady, pretended to be the queen's friend and entered the French court in 1785. She fooled a high society member into believing that Antoinette loved him. She even hired a buy-selling worker and disguised her as the queen and convinced the man that Marie wanted to purchase a diamond necklace. The jewelry cost around 1,600,000 livres then, which is almost $12 million today. The money was never paid, and the queen had no clue about what had taken place. But even though she was innocent, the public still despised her. Granted, she's mostly known for her infamous dialogue. When French subjects could not afford bread, she said, "Let them eat cake," which fueled the French Revolution and ultimately led to her execution. Number 4, Queen of Castile. So Juana la Loca was the Queen of Castile from 1504 to 1516, and she suffered from various mental disorders. After her husband passed in 1506, her father buried his body. However, Juana used to open the tomb and caress her husband's dead body, and ultimately she ordered the body dug out and kissed her husband's feet. Additionally, she would carry his coffin everywhere with her, and actually kept it under her bed. Years later though, she eventually allowed his burial outside her window. Look, I just keep weird dolls under my bed. Number 3, Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg. Maria Eleonora, born on November 11th of 1599, passing eventually on March 28th of 1655, held the title of Queen of Sweden from 1620 to 1632 as the wife of King Gustav II Adolf. Coming from a noble German family, she belonged to the prestigious house of I'm not even going to try and say that. However, when Maria and Gustav gave birth to a girl with a genetic condition causing excessive hair growth, Maria was deeply shocked. The unexpected appearance of her daughter, combined with societal beauty expectations, pushed Maria to her limits. She considered her daughter ugly and refused to care for what she perceived as a monstrous creature. When Gustav died when Christina was only, this many years old, Maria blamed her for his death. For over a year, Maria subjected Christina to very harsh punishment, confining her to blacked-out, darkened rooms to mourn her father in solitude for very extended periods, even placing her father's open casket in Christina's room and demanding she sleep next to it, which that's way too morbid. Even by my standards. Maria's mental state deteriorated, eventually leading to Christina's removal from her custody. So, thank goodness for Christina. Number 2 is Sixty the Dragon Lady. So, the story of her rise to power is a remarkable one. Born at a time when Chinese women were politically invisible, this lady managed to acquire enormous political influence by exploiting her position as a royal concubine, engaging in court intrigues and manipulating those around her. By the end of the 1860s, she had become the most powerful individual in China. Her will and her reach even exceeded 2 male emperors, who she frequently bypassed or overruled. Now, she was originally born Lan Kuo in 1835, the daughter of a minor Manchu official, and at age 15 she was selected as a potential concubine for the emperor and relocated to the Forbidden City. She was elevated to the status of concubine officially by age 18, eventually giving birth to the emperor's only son, Zechun, a feat that earned her another promotion in the palace hierarchy. The emperor died in 1861, and shortly after the disastrous Second Opium War, left the throne to his only son. So as the mother of the reigning emperor, Cixi was given the courtesy title Dowager Empress. So by this point, the empress had become quite adept at manipulation, palace intrigues, and power games. Through forged evidence and false testimony, she engineered the arrest of the 8 ministers, 3 of whom were later executed. With the regency council gone, the empress became the de facto regent for the duration of her son's reign, until his early death from smallpox in 1875. The empress was instrumental in the succession, choosing her young nephew Zetian, who was crowned as emperor. So once again, this Dowager Empress acted as regent to the infant emperor, this time in a more formal capacity. 12 years into the young emperor's reign, our empress moved to the summer palace in Beijing, and surrounded by a network of informants and advisors, doted on by loyalists and conservatives in the bureaucracy and military, she continued to exert enormous influence on appointments, policies, and matters of state. Stories of the empress's extravagance are prevalent, since it has been claimed that she regularly increased her personal and food allowances, that she withdrew gold and silver silver from dwindling national reserves and spirited millions of pounds offshore into bank accounts in London. Other tales of her exorbitant spending include her decision to spend 10 million silver teals, some set aside to rebuild the Chinese Navy, on the renovation of one of her palaces. Another rumor claims that 3,000 ebony boxes were needed to restore her jewelry collection. Number 1. Agrippina the Younger. So Julia Agrippina, also referred to as Agrippina the Younger, was a Roman empress from 49 to 54 AD, the fourth wife and niece of Emperor Claudius and the mother of Nero. After the death of her first husband, Agrippina tried to make shameless advances to the future emperor Galba, who showed no interest in her and was devoted to his wife. On one occasion, Galba's mother-in-law gave Agrippina a public reprimand and a slap in the face before a whole bevy of married women. She was one of the most prominent women in the Julio-Claudian dynasty, functioning as a behind-the-scenes advisor in the affairs of the Roman state via, the powerful political ties. She maneuvered her son Nero into the line of succession, and Claudius became aware of her plotting, but died in 54, and it was rumored that Agrippina poisoned him. She exerted a commanding influence in the early years of Nero's reign, but in 59 she was killed. Both ancient and modern sources describe Agrippina's personality as ruthless, ambitious, violent, and domineering.
Number 10. Marie Antoinette. I wonder what it must have been like to be the Queen of France. To sit in a palace and eat all those delicious foods that your cooks can make while the peasants outside struggle to eat and sing about bread for some reason. I don't know, Les Mis reference. It's a life of beauty, balls, and not listening to what the stinky peasants outside have to say. Except that's the very reason why Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France. You can only spend so much time and money on your exuberant lifestyle before the people get fed up. I mean, these people have nothing. It's kind of difficult to control people when they don't even have food at home. They let the queen know how upset they were when they decided to remove her head from her body. Number 9. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. Sometimes it's just in the name, isn't it? Like Mario, you know that he's an Italian plumber. Or Luigi, you can tell that that's an Italian plumber's brother. And King Dedede, king of the DDDs or something. I don't know. Okay, maybe the names don't always give it away, but Bloody Mary does. Most known for her liberal use of the wooden stake and the whole burning folks alive thing. I wish I could tell you it was for barbecue, but it was actually for some more serious religious persecution and reformation. The Catholic Church was hot, but the witches and heretics burning at the stake were hotter. No cap. Number 8. Reina Valona of Madagascar. This one is a new one for me. Didn't know about this, but here we go. So basically, Queen Reina I'm just gonna call her Queen Ravioli because I can't pronounce it. Basically, Queen Ravioli takes over from her past husband. She says to herself, how can I make things better? Oh, I know. How about I become a ruthless, bloodthirsty, unaliving tyrant? Great idea, right? Yes, very not great success. Yes, unfortunately she did many heinous things. Something I found out to be particularly interesting, however, was her destroying the many good things her husband had set up before her. Madagascar had some European intervention, and while it's true that a lot of times that is a bad thing, and yeah, it's a bad thing, and it does bring some bad stuff with it, however, it also brings a lot of good things with it. In Madagascar's case, it was markets, modern schools, trade, and diplomacy with Europe, and that's good. Money's good, you like that. Well, the queen wasn't having any of that, so she reformed. And by that I mean she repressed and unalive people. Number 7. Empress Irene. Kings, queens, emperors, and empresses. Chances are these folks are related. It's a family thing. E mia familia, you know what I mean? It's how it goes when you're the king, and you need a son to continue the lineage. Even though I would like to argue that if you're gone, you're gone. So who really cares who's taken over? Just my opinion. Speaking of eye gouging, oh wait, I didn't mention that before. I made a segue, but okay, that's alright, bad segue. Well, the topic of discussion here is Empress Irene. Basically, her son was taking too much power for himself. She was losing hers, and yada yada, and his eyes were gouged out from 2 guards ordered by his dear, sweet mother. Can you blame her though? I mean, come on, he was threatening her rule. She worked so hard to get there. The chief was just silent on this one. Chief had no words for that one, guys. No words. Number 6, Fu Hao. Another woman in history married to a man in the stinky patriarchy. Worst! Except Fu Hao didn't want to be wife 57 of 64. She wanted more than that. And to be honest, I think that's fair. You go, girl. Who wants to be wife 57 of 64? Maybe some people in Utah, I don't know. What's maybe slightly more unholy than having that many wives is going on an epic military campaign and raging war in the Shang dynasty. A warrior queen, if you will. We know some of this history based on her tomb, as she was buried with ceremonial weapons, knives, blades, swords, some dogs, some human sacrifices, gold, money, jade, and lots of other valuable goodies. Just makes you want to loot all the stuff in there, doesn't it? I mean, jade's pretty cool. This was a common practice amongst male warriors back then, but you know what? Good for her and all that unaliving. Way to go, sister. I like it. Very nice. Okay. Number 5, Empress Irene. Mother dearest. Most people have fond memories of their mothers. Maybe you should call her. I'm just saying. Mother's Day happened. You should call her. Empress Irene was a woman who wanted power. Honestly, who doesn't? We've all got a little bit of Sith in us. Yes. Her son, who had naturally inherited some of her power, was growing stronger by the day. Now, maybe it was ego. Maybe it was envy. Maybe her son just took down her live, laugh, love signs. I'm not sure. But Irene was not having any of it. So, when her son least expected it, she had 2 guards apprehend him and had his eyes gouged out. Now, being that this was before 2022, this was a critical medical injury, and after 9 days of grueling pain, and when I'm sure it was a lot of blind confusion, the injury proved to be fatal. So, what's the lesson here? Blood is not as thick as water? I don't really know, it's just messed up. Number 4, Queen of Castile. Life can be tough sometimes, especially when we lose the ones we love the most. Everybody deals with things differently. The Queen of Castile is a person who deals with that, well, very differently. People passing on was no rare occurrence back in those days. There's 1,000 reasons on how you could wind up 6 feet under. When the Queen of Castile's husband passed away from the disease of the month, she was devastated. Rightfully so, that's rough. However, that being said, sometimes you gotta take that with a little grace. For days she would not leave her husband's side, even after he was a cold cadaver. Later on, that corpse would travel with her, apparently even stopping a carriage once to get out and kiss his feet. It's Weekend at Bernie's, except a lot sadder and gross. And not a charming 80s movie. Ugh. Number 3, Carlotta of Mexico. This is a new one for me, but an interesting story nonetheless. Basically, France wanted a piece of Mexico, and I mean, come on, who doesn't? It's gorgeous. Carlotta was a Belgian princess who kind of just married into the royal family and got plopped down in some chaos in Mexico. There was a war, enough political strife to make anyone involved in the Watergate scandal start to look for documents. It was messy. It wasn't a good time. It got so bad that she had to go back to Europe and basically made the call that all university students have to make after Frosh Week. Hey mom, dad, listen, yeah, I'm great. Do you think maybe you could send me some money? Yeah, I need some help. Except her phone call wasn't like that. Her phone call was more like, hey, European nobility, can you come please save my husband because he's about to get de-lifed and like stabilize the country? Thanks. Spoiled princess calling. Hi. It didn't work out in the end. He got de-lifed, she went back home, and well, she went a little crazy. Number 2, Elizabeth Bathory. Serial de-lifers, your queen has arrived. I think this one is one of the more interesting cases in history. Usually when you think of a creepy de-lifer that lurk in the night, you think of Gacy, Dahmer, you know, guys like that. It's not very often that it's a woman and or someone from before the 19th or 20th century. That's just how it goes. I'd also argue perishing and manual de-lifing was a part of life back in medieval times, so kind of hard to quantify what is and isn't a serial de-lifer or life taker. However, I think she counts. The body count is estimated to be somewhere in the hundreds, and a most peculiar rumor is that she bathed in the blood of her victims. Ooh, that's gross. Bathing in water. That checks out. Bathing in mud. You go to a spa. That checks out too. Bathing in beer. Sticky and strange, but check. I've done it. One time I did that. Bathing in blood. That's a no calzone for me, chief. While the bathing in blood thing might be false, the evidence of her crimes were not. Imagine being so spoiled you can hide bodies. Number 1, Queen Mary. Henry VIII was a big bad dude who wanted it his way. He wasn't the Burger King, although by looking at him you could tell he was packing a few of those bad boys away too. No, he was the King of England and he had many wives and was spoiled himself. So, do you think his children grew up humble and wise? Nay, kind sir and madam. Queen Mary took the throne a few years later and wasn't happy with the Protestants. Ugh, too many, she said to herself. Well, if you've heard us talk about her before, she'll probably come up again time and time again because, well, she cooked those people on a wooden stake. Over her reign, countless people felt the fires of her wrath, hence the name Bloody Mary.
Queen number 10 is Maria of Romania, otherwise known as Missy, the nickname she earned to match her spunk and vitality. With her father always away, her Duchess mother reigned the household, and Marie learned a lot from the independent girl boss of a mother, even though the Duchess believed that the apple had fallen miles from her tree. AKA, she saw her kids were kinda dumb, but this is because Missy, in namesake of this video, loved to be spoiled. Attending her mother's countless parties, she loved to be in the spotlight. She'd even ride her white horse through the center of them. When it wasn't a party, it was a theater or gown shopping. Missy loved material things and entertainment. It all came to a crashing end, however, when the family moved to Coburg, Germany, and her mother hired an authoritarian German governess who felt the royal youngsters were far too spoiled. She replaced their soft beds with cots, put them on a seriously strict lesson plan, and traded their beautiful silk dresses with rough cotton ones. However, this seemed to do well for our girl Missy because she became a cross-blend between a spoiled socialite and an intense diplomatic leader. She's married off to the Crown Prince Ferdinand, heir to the Romanian throne, in 1892 and has not one but 3 wedding ceremonies and elaborate gowns. She often got into verbal jousts with members of the court and became notorious for her independence and rebelliousness. And while World War was running amok, Missy became beloved in multiple countries by people and diplomats alike. She's intelligent, powerful, intimidating, all wrapped in a pretty package. And she even used her status as a fashion icon in a show of solidarity with the Romanian peasant revolt in 1907 by wearing Romanian folk clothing, starting a surprising fashion trend as well-to-do women started wearing the traditional peasant clothing as well. When it came time, she and Ferdinand planned one of the most elaborate coronations that Romania had ever seen. The royals built a whole cathedral for the occasion, and then they served steak to over 20,000 people. Missy wore an elegant custom-made silk and fur costume, and a famous Parisian jeweler made her solid gold crown. Treat yourself. Queen number 9 is Antoinette. Come on, you know she's gonna come up. Trust me, I'm not the type to smear campaign Marie Antoinette either, because at the end of the day, she was a teenage puppet shipped off to France to forge political alliances as a figurehead. She was intentionally undereducated, yes, but that didn't make her ignorantly evil. Marie Antoinette has become synonymous with the decadence and the unfortunate focal point of the French Revolution. While she never said the famous line, "Let them eat cake," she most definitely displayed grandeur at a time where people were starving, leaving her plagued by gossip and scandal, which she chose to ignore, and that doesn't look very good. She set trends for stuffed bird hats that led to a species being hunted to extinction, and she imported the world's most expensive material at the time, a hand-painted fabric from India, for many of her dresses. She donned gold and jewels. Meanwhile, outside the palace gates, France was growing restless and had chosen its scapegoat. Dubbing her Madame Deficit, unaware Marie was blamed for all the country's misfortunes, and her family paid for it with their lives. Despite the indignities heaped on her before her death, this sweet girl went to the guillotine calmly, and now Marie Antoinette has forever been immortalized as the symbol of class conflict. Treat yourself. Queen number 8 is de Medici. Catherine de Medici has been mentioned in a few of our recent queen-related videos for her evil, disturbing, and cruel behavior. Maybe take a second to check out those videos too if you're a fan of ghastly queen drama, and subscribe to the Hive while you're at it. But aside from being a heinous B-word, this queen also happens to be a pretentious, spoiled nightmare. During her time playing a personal Game of Thrones, she collected an impressive list of titles reflecting her horrid reputation. Madame la Serpente, Maggot from Italy's tomb, the Black Queen. She had been married to the heir of France's throne, Henry II, in 1533 in a ludicrously extravagant affair. The French and Italians exchanged expensive gifts, ate exotic foods, and partied late into the night. Henry even spent the evening showing off to his new bride. However, his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, held his heart. Catherine hated Diane. However, when she came to France, Catherine witnessed for the first time the power a beautiful woman could wield on a man in courts. Thanks to Diane and Henry's relationship, which she would watch through holes she drilled in the floor and their walls. Not kidding. Anyways, Catherine, ever the tactician, gained a reputation for surrounding herself with France's most beautiful and desired women, dubbed the Flying Squadron. These 80 or so women were her spies, who she'd send into enemies' beds, political meetings, and out into the streets of France to collect her tidbits of information she could use. However, as a patron of the Italian Renaissance, Medici truly spoiled herself in collecting more than just pretty women. The woman's gallery was seemingly endless. She hosted painters and sculptors of the world in her home and procured some of the world's most desirable pieces, which alongside her wealth, she left to Florence, Italy when she died. Treat yourself. Queen number 7 is the Shadow Queen of France, aka Diane de Poitiers. Okay, so she's an honorary queen thinking, let's let her have this, because Diane didn't have much aside from a keen head on her shoulder and the love of France's king, something not even collector Catherine Medici could obtain, and she was married to him. Diane had been around Henry since before Catherine was in the picture, or born, so no wonder she made the woman a third wheel. But Diane earns the dub as an honorary queen for more than just skulking around the king. She was actually intellectually and politically sound. Henry consulted with her, valued her opinion on political moves and plots, and she even wrote several of Henry II's official letters, which she would sign for him. Sometimes they even signed the letters with their couple name, Henry Diane. I kinda get why Catherine was so annoyed, like rub it in her face much. Anywho, how was she spoiled? Well, she drank gold, like literal gold. I'd say drinking gold would like constitute as having some money to toss around, but back in 16th century France, people, especially members of nobility, tried to assuage wrinkles and age spots with a daily tonic of gold chloride mixed with diethyl ether. Seeing as one of the ingredients literally has dye in the name, you know this stuff was toxic. Diane was known for a few other things as whack as this, such as having her own official color in court, which was black and white, because it represented the dark and the light of the moon. Also, when her husband died and she was left a widow, she quite literally reinvented herself to be the Roman goddess Diane and expected to be treated as such. She used Henry's obsessive love for her to reign in jewels, gowns, power, and glory. Treat yourself, queen number 6 is Cleopatra. Come on! Once again, this girl had to come up. You had to know. Cleopatra is one of the most famous rulers of the ancient world, renowned for her cunningness, beauty, and materialism. She grew up amidst unsurpassed luxury and inherited a kingdom that was in decline, but it didn't stay that way. Cleo was a mastermind who managed to flip the board and turn Egypt into a literal cash cow before she lost it to Octavian. Like de Medici, Cleo, however, was big on collecting items. She cultivated Egypt long before she ruled there, and their identity and product was her most favored from anywhere in the world. She spent her childhood practicing dramatic entrances into rooms and sewing elaborate costumes to depict herself as the goddess Isis, who she came to genuinely believe herself to be. Mark Antony famously emptied the libraries of Pergamum just to give her 200,000 manuscripts, knowing she loved a good book. And who can forget he allegedly gave her 3 gold and jewel encrusted eggs, each more valuable than the last. And then there's the famous story of the pearls, how she had the most elaborate and expensive pearl in all of the lands, and during a bet with Mark dissolved it in wine and drank it to show her grandeur. Call that a power move. How wealthy was she that she could just drink down a fortune like that? Well, to quote, into her coffers went approximately half of what Egypt produced. Her annual cash revenue was somewhere between 12,000 and 15,000 silver talents, and to break down how insane that was, the most lavish of lavish burials for kings cost 1 talent. A half talent was a crushing fine for an Egyptian villager. A priest in her day made 15 talents yearly. On one contemporary list, Cleopatra appears as the 26th richest person in history, worth about $96 billion today.